Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now we're in Utah at the site where Fort Sanford once stood. Now this fort was built in 1866 as part of Utah's Black Hawk War. But what brings us here today is something else that happened near here in 1866. The birth of one of the most famous outlaws in American history. Made even more famous when Paul Newman played him in a movie. Of course, I'm talking about Butch Cassidy. And today, we're going to visit his childhood home. Right now, we're on Highway 89, about 20 miles or so south of Circleville. There's nothing left of Fort Sanford. This fort was built for the Black Hawk War, and we were just at a different fort from the Black Hawk War, which was in last week's video. But according to this plaque, this fort was unique in design and construction. Unfortunately, the plaque doesn't say what made it unique. Before becoming an infamous train and bank robber and the leader of an outlaw gang called the Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy's early life was spent here in Utah. He was born Robert Leroy Parker on April 13, 1866 in Beaver, the oldest child of Mormon Pioneers. In 1879, when Butch Cassidy was 13 years old, his family purchased a homestead near Circleville, which is where we're heading now. It was while living at that ranch that Robert Leroy Parker would commit his first known theft and rub shoulders with a noted cattle thief named Mike Cassidy, for whom he'd later take his name. We've arrived at the homestead, and I can't imagine this looks much different than it did in Butch Cassidy's time. Well, aside from the big parking lot. Butch Cassidy was the oldest of 13 children, and when his family moved here, he began to work on ranches in the area to help out the family. His religious upbringing and family life isn't exactly the typical backstory for an Old West outlaw, but he looked up to Mike Cassidy, who taught him about handling horses and guns, and that must have been a big influence on him. Butch's first known criminal offense was in 1880, when he broke into a clothing shop and stole a pair of jeans and some pie. He left an IOU, but the store owner pressed charges anyway. He was later acquitted by a jury. You see a small house like this and you have to wonder how they had 13 kids. There isn't much room, and where did they find the privacy? Let's head inside and take a look around. So in 1884, some thieves stole cattle in the area, and Butch took the blame. He left this homestead in April, before word of the theft got out, and for the next few years, he'd send money home. And I'm not sure if any of the furniture in here is original to the house or even period accurate. Unfortunately, there's no signs inside the building. Here's the roof. I saw a chimney on the outside, but it looks like this stove goes up to the chimney. I don't see any fireplace in here. After leaving here, Butch Cassidy headed to Telluride, Colorado, and then Wyoming and Montana, where he took part in various odd jobs and lived a cowboy's life. By 1889, he was back in Telluride though, because on June 24th of that year, Butch and 3 of his associates robbed San Miguel Valley Bank and stole about $21,000, which is equal to over $715,000 today. He was arrested in Wyoming in 1894 and served 18 months before being pardoned by the governor. That pardon ended up being a pretty bad idea, because shortly after Cassidy got out of prison, he and a number of other outlaws formed the Wild Bunch, one of the most notorious gangs of outlaws in American history. In late 1896, Cassidy recruited the outlaw he's most associated with today into the gang, Harry Longabaugh, otherwise known as the Sundance Kid. Here's that chimney. It looks like it's only on top of the building. This shed is the only other building here. Let's go take a look inside, see what's in there. Between 1896 and 1901, Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch robbed a number of banks and trains throughout Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, including probably their most famous train robbery, when they robbed the Union Pacific's Overland Flyer in 1899. Over $50,000 was taken in that robbery, which would be about $1.9 million today. And this is perfect timing, because the Wild Bunch was sometimes known as the Hole in the Wall Gang. They were called the Hole in the Wall Gang because it was the name of a place they'd hide out in Wyoming. Unfortunately, it had nothing to do with this shack. Some of these trees were probably here when Butch Cassidy lived here. There's some old farm equipment laying around, but this doesn't look like it dates to the 1880s. It looks newer than that. Right next to the homestead is the Butch Cassidy ATV trail. I don't have an ATV with me, but we could walk down here and see if there's anything to see. So getting back to Butch Cassidy, in 1901, he and the Sundance Kid fled to South America, where they continued to rob banks. They may have met their ends in 1908 after a gunfight with the Bolivian military. At least that's the most accepted story of what happened to them, though there's some dispute whether it was actually them or not. Both an old girlfriend and one of Butch Cassidy's sisters claim to have seen him in the 1920s. It's probably a mystery that'll never be solved. I'm not exactly sure how long Butch Cassidy's family owned this homestead. His mom died in 1905, but his dad lived all the way until 1938. It looks like the trail goes off in 3 different directions here. I wish I had an ATV to see where it goes, but unfortunately, I don't have one. Butch Cassidy was well known in his time, but thanks to movies and other mass media, his legend has only grown over the last 100+ years, which makes it all the more interesting to see a place like this, where it all started. So that's our look at Butch Cassidy and his boyhood home. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.